Paul Kohler.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Dame Diana, I want to pick up something really building on what Sean was saying then. What I wanted to ask Chief Constable Harrington, but I didn't have the time, was he was being too modest because he succeeded despite the system failing him. He didn't have enough power at the top to call for resources. That slowed down mobilisation. And I'm not still clear how we're going to address that because I think as Sean made the point, who is asking those questions? What role do you think the government has in that? And is there something missing that we need to insert?
Thank you very much for that question. I'd like to come to that in a moment, but before I do, I did want to say I am very pleased to appear before you today, and I'm really delighted that you are doing this inquiry because I think parliamentary scrutiny of the events of last summer are really important, sitting alongside the work that the HMIC are doing, reviewing what happened. And I also just wanted to say, echoing really, Dame Karen, what you were just saying at the end of that first session, I wanted to pay tribute to those police officers who were on the front line from the 29th of July, dealing with that horrific incident in Southport. And of course, our thoughts and prayers are still with the victims and the families of that incident. But recognising that those same police officers then, just a few hours later, were then facing the violence and the disorder on the streets. So I just wanted to say that because I know over 300 police officers were injured during the course of those the summer disorder, and from fractures, bones being broken, fractures to the face, concussion, trauma. I think we recognise what those police officers put up with. And I also think it's worth just reflecting as well that if you look particularly at the Rotherham Hotel incident, I think police officers there saved lives because that crowd of people were intent on getting into that hotel and causing harm to the asylum seekers there. So I think they saved lives, they put themselves at risk on the front line. And when I spoke to police officers in Humberside and Cleveland, to listen to what their experiences were was humbling. And so I think it's right that what you said, Dame Karen, about the bravery and the courage of those frontline police officers. And then I think I also just wanted to say that I actually agree with what you just said about the system. And I think what struck me as a new minister, we were just 4 weeks into government when this all happened. And I remember that on the 29th, it was our first Home Office orals as the information was coming through from Southport. So we were very new in post. And then obviously from the 29th onwards, this developed. But I think what struck me during the course of those 2 weeks was that there was exceptional leadership and partnership working. And that was in spite of, not because of, the structures that existed. So I think the work that Constable B.J. Harrington, Gavin Stevens as the chair of the MPCC, many other chief constables, they worked incredibly well together, but the structures, I think I would say on behalf of the Home Secretary and myself, we found the structures were not designed for that national response when you're facing disorder at the level that we had. And I think it was really clear that the localised way of policing in this country, the 43 police forces, the chief constables and the PCCs, who I think it's worth just saying are responsible for the totality of policing in their area. When you are then trying to deal with things on a national level, you're absolutely right. Having that ability to hold to account, I think, was a problem. And I think it would also be worth saying I was surprised when the Home Secretary and myself were asking for information about, for example, the number of officers who would be available to be on the streets. There was a little uncertainty about that. They couldn't give us definite answers. And that's because, I think, of the patchwork that happens around the country. So some chief constables would say we could provide X amount, but actually it was Y, it wasn't X. So there was uncertainty. And the Home Secretary, I know, was, and I think B.J. Harrington actually said this in the evidence, that there was a level of intrusion. There was a level of intrusion because the Home Secretary and myself wanted to be reassured that there were sufficient police officers on the streets to deal with the disorder, and the structures that exist couldn't provide that certainty. And I think the Home Office, because of the over the last 14 years, that the approach that's been taken to policing, devolving everything down to the local level, I think the Home Office for me felt like it had been hollowed out in terms of being able to hold the ring in terms of what was policing doing. So we were asking lots of questions, and I think the chief constables and the officials were doing their very best, but the structures weren't there to support what we needed, and that's why the Home Secretary has made very clear we need to have this reform agenda for policing to make sure that we have the capabilities that are required. There is the ability to have a national response when required, recognising operational independence of chief constables, but also recognising that the Home Office and ministers want to have a grip. We want to know that police forces are performing, that police forces have the workforces they need, that the capabilities that they require are there. So I think that's kind of my response to your point.
So what are you going to do?
That's why the Home Secretary set out, we're going to have a white paper this year setting out a reform agenda. And that's about looking at what we need for policing going forward. I think, our policing structures often are from quite a few decades ago. And I just look, for example, at the national aviation capability for policing. You have to have 43 chief constables and 43 PCCs making decisions about a national aviation capability. And I think we'd all probably recognise that's not the most efficient way of doing things, and it's not necessarily the best way of achieving what we want, which is a good capability. So at the moment, that sits with West Yorkshire, and everyone has to agree for changes to be brought forward. So what the Home Secretary is saying, that there are some capabilities we can bring into a national body for policing. That would be an example, aviation, perhaps forensics, perhaps IT, because we recognise that 43 police forces sorting out their own IT systems and buying the licences for each force is not the most efficient way. And we all know and we all accept money is tight, and we have to make sure that every penny we spend is spent well and efficiently. So I think this national policing body is important. I think the Home Office as well. I'm really keen as a minister to have data and performance information. And I'll just tell you this, in December I said to my officials how many police officers had been injured in the riots. And they said to me, well, we can't tell you that, Minister. We'll have to write to 43 police forces to ask them, because we don't hold that information in the Home Office. So another issue that the Home Secretary has set up is a performance unit where we will get data and we will be able to assess what's happening in each police force. And for PCCs, like Emily, having that information that they're able to use then when they hold their own chief constable to account, I think will be very helpful. So it'll help me as a minister, but it'll help the PCC in terms of the accountability.
I asked them about restoring trust in the police. There was a certain degree, well, it's beyond us almost. It's a failure of institutions. But there are issues for the police, particularly in trust as well. How is the government helping the police rebuild trust and confidence in them?
You're absolutely right. Trust and confidence in policing is one of the key parts of our Safer Streets mission. And one aspect of that, an important one, is the neighbourhood policing guarantee. So it's about putting those police officers, PCSOs and specials back into our neighbourhoods, our high streets, our communities. Because we all know as members of Parliament that constituents want to see a police presence. They want to have that reassurance. And it's more than that, isn't it? Because we know that having that neighbourhood policing will often provide the intelligence that then feeds into either, antisocial behaviour, or in some cases, very serious cases, the terrorism threat that might be existing in communities. So I think that neighbourhood policing presence is fundamental to partly dealing with the trust and confidence issue. But there are other things as well, and I'm sure you might want to ask questions about, some of the dreadful cases we've seen in policing, the people who put themselves forward for policing and making sure that we have the best people and that they have, they comply with the highest standards, and where they don't, they are no longer police officers, and having proper mechanisms for getting people out of policing. That's another important part of building trust and confidence.
And going back to the neighbourhood policing, how do you square the circle of having abstractions and needing abstractions but maintaining neighbourhood policing?
And that's obviously a really big issue, and I know as London MPs particularly, you will be concerned about that. And I know Matt Twist would say to me when I've asked him questions about this in the past, that because of London and the number of protests that are held in London, and particularly over the last couple of years, there's been a huge need for officers to be present in central London at weekends for some of the protests. So I fully accept abstraction's a problem, but the neighbourhood policing guarantee is supposed to be about saying we recognise that it's important that neighbourhood officers are in neighbourhoods, and really only in exceptional circumstances would you be abstracting them out of that particular role. And we're working through at the moment how best we can design the system so policing can accommodate that. But you're absolutely right. I'm not pretending it's going to be an easy thing to do, and I fully recognise abstractions are a particular issue in London.
David.
In